Hello, my name is Yannick Pelletier. I'm a Swiss Grandmaster. In this video we are going to analyze the crazy game between Vladimir Kramnik and Fabiano Caruana played in the fourth round of the Candidates Tournament in Berlin 2018. At this point in the tournament, Kramnik was leading with 2.5 points out of 3 and Caruana had 2 points out of 3, and this battle proved actually crucial for the fight for first place in this very important tournament, one of the most important phase in the World Championship cycle. Kramnik in this tournament played in general very riskily, and in this game this is no exception. Actually, we're going to see a Kramnik which at the start was not very, let's say, active, aggressive, but in the course of the fight he sacrificed a piece and in order to try and unsettle Caruana. Let's see how it's going here. Kramnik starting with e4 and Caruana remaining faithful to his favorite Petrov, which he has been playing regularly or almost exclusively in recent tournaments. d6, knight f3, knight takes e4 and queen e2. Not very impressive, but because white actually accepts to exchange queens early on, thus he doesn't really put pressure on black, we can say. But Kramnik probably had something in mind, but I believe he didn't really manage to show it, because black in fact equalized quite easily here, as you can see from the start. A long castle and short castle by Caruana, opposite castles but without queens. Basically we don't really believe there will be any attack by any of the players on the opposite king. Rook h e1, bishop f6, knight d2, rook e8 and bishop f3. It looks quite nice on first sight for white, placing the bishop on the long diagonal, trying to exert some pressure there and hinder the development of the black bishop on c8. But here Caruana just found a very good plan. He played knight e5, bishop f4, the rook on e8 is hanging, we can't take on f3, but after king f8, now white has to be careful not to allow the exchange here. And Kramnik played bishop d5, but after c6 he had to leave that long diagonal and move the bishop back to b3, where it is not placed very impressively. Actually it doesn't really threaten anything, and it's actually more passive than anything else here. We can actually say that Caruana has solved his opening problems, or even more than this. He played bishop f5, h3, g5, another good move, taking space on the king side, bishop h2, king g7. Well, the outcome of the opening is clear. I've mentioned before, black has solved his problems and it can actually look to the future with a kind of optimism, and I think Kramnik should have been already quite happy with the draw. A possibility was to play f4, gf, bishop takes h4, bishop takes f4, sorry, and now h5, and the position is still more or less equal. White hasn't really committed any special crime against the rules of chess here. Kramnik decided to play c4, g4, and knight e4 now. And Caruana kept on playing really well here. He took on e4, giving up the two bishops, but with a very concrete idea in mind. Bishop g5 check, king b1, g takes h3, and in this moment Kramnik decided to take huge risks by sacrificing a piece. Actually, he certainly calculated very far and understood, I'm almost convinced, he understood that what he was going to play was very risky, but he probably compared the line in the game with the alternative g takes h3, and there he might have underestimated his chances to equalize. Indeed, it doesn't look really good after f5. The rook has to go back, knight f3, exchanging rooks, bishop takes d6, and now rook e2. The rook penetrates and black's pieces are very active. The bishop on b3 remains passive here, and white has to solve some problems, but with bishop b4 he manages actually to get some activity himself. Rook takes f2, check on d7, king g6, and now a4, creating a hole for the king to a2 in case of a check on the back rank. And with the two bishops, I think white has enough to equalize the game, and especially the white rook has also become quite active, so that, you know, at some point this pawn on a4 could become dangerous as well. So chances are balanced here. I think Kramnik should have rather gone for this, but he went all out with c5, just leaving this pawn here on h3, not just on h3, but now after f5, rook b4, h takes g2, the pawn has appeared on the second rank, and in connection with moves like knight f3, it becomes a real thorn in the white's position. Check on b7, king h8, the best square for the king, c takes d6, knight f3. And I think Kramnik calculated this line until around here, and well, he thought he might have enough chances. You see, the rook is hanging, the pawn on g2 is hanging, so if he manages to eliminate this pawn on g2, taking it with the bishop next, then he might have chances to, you know, push his own pawns, and he actually thought it compensates for the piece he has sacrificed. Rook a d8 is the move played by Caruana here, and indeed now after bishop takes e8, rook takes d6. Well, of course this pawn on g2 is now too dangerous, and black is even winning here, so white has to keep his d-pawn, d7, rook e2, takes on g2, rook takes f2, going back to c6, and here both players were short of time, but Caruana was in more severe time trouble than Kramnik, and he started shaking, started playing in a slightly shaky way. He moved the knight back, but actually he had knight f1 here. Knight f1 would have been very strong, not just trying to go to e3, but also keeping the possibility to give a check on d2. This would have actually even given black a more or less winning position, even though in time trouble everything can still happen. He went back to g4 instead of this, and here Kramnik could have played c4. This would have been a good way to continue pushing the c-pawn as soon as possible and trying to create indeed problems for the rook and supporting the d-pawn as well. So this would have been still quite messy here. Instead of this, he took on a7, knight e3, rook g1, and here again, I mean, Kramnik has given the game a very complicated turn. He could have kept it quiet as we saw before, but he decided to go for these complications, certainly trying to upset and settle Caruana by turning completely the character of the fight, and it could have worked. Well, objectively black is winning, and had Caruana played here rook takes c2, he could have reached even a winning position. The bishop is attacked on c6, and if it goes back to a4, rook f2, still rook takes g5, impossible because of the mate here on f1. And otherwise in this position the c-pawn has disappeared, so that d7 is a bit lonely, still dangerous but lonely, and now black can certainly push his f-pawn down the board. So Caruana would have gotten a winning position here, but he was in time trouble and he played it safe, h6, giving white the chance to play rook c7. Now he came with the king, a4, king f7, bishop b5, king e7, a5. Here he went rook f4, c3, preventing rook d4 or rook b4. And perhaps he should have played rook g4 here. The position is still very, very messy, and in time trouble you don't really understand who is better and what lines are, because it's so hair-raising here that I think both players didn't really know where they were going or what result they were playing for. In any case, king d6 played by Caruana is a mistake which could have been exploited immediately by Kramnik had he played rook c6 check. That's a very strong move. The king has to go back to e7 and then a6. The point behind white's check on c6 is that d7 is actually not really hanging. If black takes it, there is rook c8. Well, the rook cannot remain on d7 and the a pawn is very dangerous, so you have to play rook a7, allowing rook e8 check. King f7, rook takes e3, and white has recovered the piece he has sacrificed some 10-15 moves before, and he's a pawn up, not just any pawn, but there is this pawn on a6 which is extremely dangerous, and it's true that there are opposite colored bishops on the board, but with all rooks on as well, white keeps excellent winning chances, and objectively even white should be winning here. I guess Kramnik would have been able to realize his advantage here in view of his excellent technique. Well, instead of this, he played rook b7, rook g4, rook e1, f4, a6. Well, the position remains better for white. These two pawns on a6 and d7 are extremely dangerous, and they are just being controlled in their run to the queen by the rook on d8, and basically there is going to be some short circuit at some point. Even if black plays rook a8 here, just a7, actually quite similar to what happened in the game. Caruana played h5, a7, rook a8, and here in his turn Kramnik started to play in a quite shaky way, not the most resolute way to try and concretize on those two pawns. Perhaps Kramnik basically in this tournament, by playing so daring chess, so risky, he actually overestimated his energy resources, and I believe he started to feel tired in a way here. It's really messy, it's not easy. I'm not criticizing him at all, but in view of his age, I mean, Caruana is about almost 20 years younger than him, so he's certainly more fresh in such tense positions. The nervous system plays an important part, so perhaps this played some trick on Kramnik here, who in this position decided to push his pawns, but he should have done this in the other way. He played b4, he should have played c4. There is an immediate threat here after h4, c5 check. Maybe he missed this idea. King takes c5, rook c1 check. And it doesn't really matter where the king goes. d4 seems natural. Bishop c6. And you can't really do anything against rook c7. And pawns are going to queen here very soon. You can even perhaps try d8 immediately and then rook d7 check. I mean, there are many ideas to try and promote these pawns, or at least one of those pawns. And black's pawns here are not advanced far enough in order to create a danger yet. Well, instead of this, Kramnik lost an important tempo by playing b4, and now he still keeps an advantage after h4. For instance, he could play immediately d8 queen with the same idea: bishop takes d8, rook d7 check, king e5, and bishop c6. This would have been enough for a clear advantage. Black has to take it, and now we have a clearly better version of let's say the material imbalance to be an exchange up for white compared to what he reached in the game. And actually this idea of d8 queen could have been realized after c4 h3 as well. d8 now, he didn't do it. Takes, rook d7, king e5, bishop c6. Doesn't really change much. It would have been better the other way around here, because after h2, rook h7, rook g8, black is actually slightly ahead in time. Rook c1 and f3 is a good move here. Rook takes f2, h2, sorry, takes on c1 and bishop g5. You're threatening many things, so you have to go back to b1, and knight takes c4. Well, I've given this position a plus equal evaluation, even though the computer believes white is clearly better, but in view of the reduced material, I think black's drawing chances are quite serious here, so I'm not sure white is winning actually. c5 was played, king e5, and there was still a chance here for Kramnik to play bishop c6, h2, something like rook h1, and by doing this he's able to blockade this square on h1, check, king b2, bishop f6, and takes on f2, on h2. Well, I mean, he has managed to eliminate the main threat here, the pawn on h2, and he keeps better chances despite the piece up for black. But what he did here was definitely a mistake, giving away his advantage now, definitely. Rook b8, rook takes a7, and rook g8. I'm not really sure what he overlooked here. Perhaps the fact that after bishop f6 now, if he takes on g4, there is this very nasty king f5, not just threatening the rook, but also threatening rook a1 mate. You can see squares c2 and b2 are protected or controlled by the black's pieces, so that's probably what he missed, or I don't really know, but he played d8 here, bishop takes, rook takes g4, and the bishop goes back to f6, renewing the threat king f5. Rook g6, rook b7, and now things are not too well for white because he's gonna lose a pawn and maybe even the second one. Bishop e2, rook takes b4. He went to a2, perhaps, well, I'm not sure what Kramnik's state of mind was in this position, or in this situation, because it's clear that things have gone wrong for him. To which extent is not so clear. I mean, shouldn't be too clear to white during the game, but it's clear that he can hardly play for a win anymore. So he should have been more secure. And king c1 is definitely safer as a move. So had he gone like this, I think the game would have ended in a draw. Instead of that, he played king a2, not spoiling anything yet, but still. And perhaps objectively, the best move for black was to play rook b8, and this more or less forces a draw, even though it's not easy to see. Rook h6. Rook a8 check, king b3 check. Now you want to check, check, check all the time. And if, you know, king c3 is not very good because of king e4, and you can't take the bishop here because of knight d5 check, gaining back the bishop. So you can try king a4, knight c2. Well, it's a long variation, but basically one which is okay for black here. Rook b8, and after rook b6, h2. Well, black is going to save the game here by eliminating the pawn or getting the bishop for the pawn h2. So basically he's able to secure a draw. Knight c2 is possible too. Rook c1, knight d4, and here the computer says bishop g4 is still an edge for white, trying to eliminate the pawn on h3 as soon as possible. Well, instead of this, he played bishop d3, rook a2. Again, the computer says king b2 would have been better, but who wants to put the king on the same diagonal as the bishop here? This is not very natural, but would have been better nevertheless. King b1 was played, and here knight b3. That's a nice resource, and from already a few moves Caruana has been playing in a very resolute way. He's understood that the tendency in the game has changed. He was clearly, well, on the defensive side, maybe even lost, and now, you know, he's starting to turn tables, and he understands this moment very well. So he's really focusing on trying to play the best move in order to put as much pressure as possible on his opponent. Rook e1, king d5. That's really good because well, he can actually try to take here, but black actually regains the piece after this move. Takes on e1 next, and h2, and h1, so it's pretty dangerous. So he's played king c2 immediately, knight d4, and here, well, he should have played king c1, even though it's not so obvious to understand. Here after the check there is bishop b1, decisively covering the check. He went to b1, which is still okay, but he's walking on a very tight rope, and after knight f3 he actually fell. Instead of here, you know, I don't know really if he was still trying to win, or if Kramnik understood he has to make a draw, but he didn't have the time to find the right solution. But rook takes f6 would have been the only move actually. Knight takes e1, and here bishop f1, h2, rook h6, king takes e5, and rook takes h2. And, well, black remains a pawn up, but in the worst case, white can give up his bishop for the pawn. I mean, I don't think black has any way to try and prevent white from giving up his bishop for the pawn. Then it's going to be rook and bishop, rook and knight against rook, which is a theoretical draw, not such a difficult task for this defensive side. Well, instead of this, he played rook d1, and this is a blunder. Short of time, of course, but still. Rook a1, king c2, rook takes d1, and only here did Kramnik understand that if he takes on d1, there is h2, rook h6, and now bishop h4 or knight h4, followed by h1, queen winning. Well, then the position is just completely lost for white. He played some moves by, you know, automatically kind of didn't believe what was happening, so it's hard sometimes to resign, but after f2 it's clear there is no choice left. So a very crucial game for both players actually, because this loss for Kramnik was the beginning of the end of his hopes to win the event. He had started so well, he played interesting chess, and he kept on playing interesting chess in the tournament, but it didn't work out, and many games ended in a very similar fashion. He would overpress, he would miss chances, and eventually lose or draw when he could have won. For Caruana, on the other hand, this was the moment in the tournament when he took the lead. He went up to +2, 3 points out of 4, and never really looked back. Even though he had some shaky moments in the tournament, he in the end qualified, and I'm sure had this game ended in another way, Caruana might also not have won the candidates tournament eventually. I hope you enjoyed this video. If this is the case, please like it and share it. Thank you very much for your attention, and goodbye.